Welcome to Tips and Tricks. Brent named it.
I figured with Pokemon being so hot right now, I hope everyone kind of got the reference to the talk. Didn't want to say gotta catch them all, but hopefully gotta get them all, so it's a very good pun, maybe.
You're welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
So there's a lot of things we're going to talk about today. It's going to be really quick. The slides will be available after the presentation, and it is recorded. So I apologize in advance. It's going to be a bit of a lightning round.
Yeah, so just a quick introduction. I'm Brent Beer. I'm one of the solutions engineers at GitHub. Okay. I didn't understand the reference to everyone laughing at the joke. I'm based out of Amsterdam, and I used to be on the training team. And also, as a follow-up to this, if there's any questions, because this is going to be kind of quick to run through some of these, we're going to be at the @Services booth after this, doing some office hours. So if there's any questions, anyone wants to come by and ask additional follow-ups, we can do that there for us to all talk about.
Can you hear me? I'll talk right into the mic, or I don't know, I'll double mic it, sorry. I'm Jamie. I'm a services engineer based out of Seattle. I like art, and I sometimes live in a van with my boyfriend and dog. You're welcome. So the agenda for today is going to be really quick. Like I said, we're going over some Git, Git LFS, GitHub, gists, and atoms. So buckle your seatbelts, put your trays in the upright position. Here we go. So Git, we're going to talk about some workflow efficiencies, some advanced usage, and Git LFS.
So I think this is one of the interesting parts about Git is that for as long as you can be working with it, there's always going to be new and interesting command line options or use cases that you can find with any commands, even the simple commands that you use every day like Git Log. This is one that I discovered while talking to some customers. They wanted some solutions for finding who's changed a file between a start and an end point, and they wanted to see all the commits that involved those pieces. So with this, you can say git log -l, or the capital L, give it the start and end, and then a colon for the file. So it basically looks a little bit like this. When you're inside your repository on your command line, git log, I need from the 3rd line down to the 10th line, find me all of the commits that have edited those lines. This could be interesting for in case you want to, you're refactoring some method and you need to find out who edited it last or how it's evolved over time to make sure you don't make the same mistakes, or you need to make sure that the ordering, or you just want to learn about it a little differently. And this is what it looks like. So this is only showing 2 commits here because I'm only showing 2 commits. I wanted to structure it, but it just outputs it just like log normally would. So if you have additional command line options here to actually go over, as you see at the top, you can pass those in. I'm only saying to show 2 commits. I'm formatting it a little differently, but these are the differences that I actually want to see on this piece.
And you'll have noticed that there were different colors. So one of the things that we want to make sure everybody's aware of, if you're not already, is you can actually configure the colors within Git. You can either do the command that we have here, which is just like an auto colorization, or in your actual config file, you can go in and specify which colors you want, and it is capable of doing actual color names. It's capable of doing ANSI, and some are capable of doing RGB as well.
Yeah, and if you want a different output for diff to show, instead of just red for files removed, if you also wanted it to be bold, you could do that as well in the configuration option inside that custom config file.
Yeah, and you can also actually flip the colors by typing reverse after the color, so the background is what is colored instead. So next we have git status dash SB, trying to conform my words into one there. So here the S stands for short and the B is for branch. So normally when you do this, it's going to put out the short format, and it's also still going to maintain that branch name so it's not lost, and it's going to look a bit like this. So before we have 5 lines of code, you see the branch name. It doesn't necessarily stand out the way that it does in the after that's shown. And then also you see the after is only 2 lines, and here the M stands for modified.
Yeah. So if you wanted to see, maybe you have a lot more context on the screen and you need to shorten that up and you want things to stand out more with color, this is a really good option for you if you want things to be really nice and concise.
Yeah, it's very clean. So again, you can kind of specify how your Git log appears. Just to make it prettier and more readable, it's kind of a nice thing to do, especially if you're staring at lines of code all day. I know most of us in this room have had those days. So here we've chosen the graph option to branch, to show like a branch graph. And then also we're specifying colors, and I mentioned before you can use color names. This is what we've done here. The ABBREV-commit is to abbreviate, and it just shortens the length. And then the date relative is something that you can do for something that is relative to the current time that you're actually putting the command in. So it could be like 3 hours ago, 6 days ago, 9 weeks ago, relative to now when you're actually putting that command in. And this is a mouthful to type, so we definitely suggest making an alias for this one if this is something that you want to use.
Yeah, for instance, in other training classes, I'll maybe save this as just Git LL or Git LG just to shorten it up, just so I have that alias to type not this every single time.
Yeah, I mean, unless you want to, but you're in the minority there. So this is an example of how that looks, and it's super pretty. And you can see the branch in kind of like an ASCII art format, which I'm a pretty big fan of. I think it's super awesome. So yeah, that's what that looks like. You can see each component has a different color, and it's just easy to find exactly what you're looking for, and it saves you time and eye strain.
So Ggrep is kind of an interesting command, because I was talking to some past colleagues, and we used this before when we were looking for a certain phrase or some changes within a file, or sorry, a method within some file, and finding out where it is, if it's called in other places. But Ggrep itself is actually a little bit more advanced than that. And actually, just straight off from the man page, at the very bottom, they list an example about this, about finding a method called time t. What's interesting about this is you can ask Ggrep to look for this and find all files. So you have the -- file separator there, and you're using a little bit of the regular expressions to say, find where this is mentioned in any file, so long as that file has a file extension of C or H. So this is a C application. We're looking for the C files or the H files where this method is actually called. So if you need to do some code refactoring, you need to find where this method is actually called from. This is a really good command to actually use. If you don't have a good global search within a text editor or anything like that, or if you're already on the command line, having an option like this that you can quickly type to stay in that context is pretty important.
Neat.
It's also very neat.
So this is another great one that I like, git config -- global, help autocorrect. I'm definitely guilty of typing COMIT instead of COMMIT, because sometimes my fingers move faster or slower than my brain, and it autocorrects something, and it points out when you do a mistype like that. And in this case, we actually have it set to autocorrect for you, and a big heads up here.
Yeah, so if you're typing a command like git commit and you mistype it, this is what the suggestion is going to do. Instead of, if you don't have this enabled, it'll say, did you mean to type git commit? And it just waits for you to retype it. If you turn on the autocorrect here, and you give it that second as the 10 seconds in this case as that time period, that means it'll wait that long before it actually executes that command. So word of caution on this, if it thinks you're trying to do a reset hard and you erase all your work because you have autocomplete or autocorrect turned on, maybe play around with that a little bit. Maybe, if it's 10 seconds, you're already going to be able to type something faster than that. So somewhere between 1 and 10 seconds, wherever you feel comfortable with that. Definitely a word of caution, but it is an interesting fix if you mistype something correctly. Definitely. All right, mistype something all the time. Sorry,
we actually are going to take questions at the end. So.
Yeah, we're going to be running low on time, so we got a lightning round.
This is the lightning round. So here we have git add -p. P stands for patch mode in this case, and patch mode is excellent. We highly recommend it. Basically, it allows you to stage only portions of files, so you're not actually having to go through and commit the entire file, just parts of it that were actually changed. So your commits are more concise, and everything's going to process a lot faster. Is it appropriate to use all the time? Maybe not. But if not, then when? Okay, so a good example of this would be if you want to correct a small bug,
but you don't actually want to completely block a large feature from coming out. So we definitely recommend a patch in that case.
Yeah, I think I use this almost every single time because I want my commits to be very small pieces. This saves me from very large merge conflicts in the future because I have those granular commits. Also, if I have debug statements or hard-coded environment variables in my code and I don't want to commit those yet, but I want to commit something else, git add-p to give me this interactive mode of selecting which piece of the code I actually want to commit, and also allows me to tell a good story of how I've developed my feature. If you're doing test-driven development, maybe you commit the test first before you actually do the method, even though you wrote it in the opposite order. So you have pretty good control with your work this way.
And there's a note in here that Brent put that I just need to read. If you're not going to do a git add-p, you're going to have a bad time.
Especially if you've ever accidentally committed those passwords or those environment variables, those are in history until you pull them out. So just really change some habits with this. I think you'll have better commits and better stories with this.
It's worth working into your workflow for sure.
So how many times has anyone worked with a merge and it's popped up in your default text editor and you've not edited the text at all and you just save it and it's kind of a hiccup in your workflow? Just show of hands real quick. Okay, so like for me, almost every single time, unless it's a fast forward merge. I did discover about the -- no edit flag, which isn't just on merges. You can also do this on git commit -- amend if you needed to amend a commit. You can just reuse the commit message by saying -- no edit. You could also, again, thinking back to those aliases, you could set an alias for this. So instead of saying git merge, if you just said git mg or something similar, whatever might work for you, just to reuse that commit message every time, this is a really good one to use to kind of work into your workflow. And Rebase. How many people feel comfortable using Rebase every day?
We have 2 hands on one person.
Double comfort there. Rebase I is one of those interesting next steps to understanding how Rebase works. I'm not just changing the base of my branch for a better merge later, but I want to control how that work I just did is actually stored in history. So Rebase -I is going to put me in this interactive mode. That's what the -I stands for. And it allows me to look at a recipe of my work to decide, well, maybe I wanted to reword this commit message, or I wanted to edit the actual change to this file that I was working on, or maybe there's a commit in the last 5 that I actually don't want to be in history at all. While doing interactive mode and specifying some point in time, like 5 commits from head ago, or specifying an individual commit to actually go back to, or git rebase -I origin/master before I push my commits to anyone else. This allows me to control the commits and how they'll be viewed by other people. So the main thing I want to stress here is as we do interactive mode, be cautious that we are rewriting those commits in history. So this is something you really want to only get used to before you've pushed any of your changes. So once you've pushed them to GitHub and other people have seen them, doing interactive mode to rewrite that history is going to cause some trouble down the line for them potentially, your coworkers or your colleagues or anyone else you're collaborating with. So please, 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 if there's one thing you remember from this talk, it's, okay, I'm going to use interactive mode. Have I pushed this yet? If you have, don't use interactive mode. Or if you have and you really need to, talk to your coworkers, coordinate with them, and make sure that they're aware of this work.
Yeah, he used the word recipe before, and I think that's a really poignant example because you're basically designing how you want your commit history to look.
Right. So in this scenario, I say git rebase -I 5 commits ago, and it pulls open Atom, which happens to be my default text editor. And for that very first commit, that's the one I'm selecting. I want to reword the second commit message. I want to edit the third one to add some additional context to it. And I'm then going to squash the fourth one into the third one. And then I'm just going to select the last one. One thing I could do here is delete a line. I know at the very bottom of this list it says D for drop, which is a newer action that you can take within newer versions of Git. But you could also just delete an entire line there. Another thing that people get caught up with this is editing that commit message that won't actually do anything. That commit ID and the commit message there is simply reference for you so you know what those commits are without having to dive into them. So this is another maybe good example for why you actually want to write good commit messages, or at least commit messages that you can understand later. Because if you have to read through this, you'll have a better idea of what you're going to be doing as you play around with this recipe. And last piece of Rebase, because it's an interesting topic to always talk about. I always get questions about it. If you're ever working on a series of feature changes and you made one change and then maybe 5 commits later you decided that there was something you wish was in that last commit, when you make that new change, in that commit message you can say squash exclamation point or squash bang and then a similar commit message and then just continue on working. And later when you do a rebase, if you include the squash option, when you go into that interactive mode, it'll sort your commits for you so that it's already set up to be squashed. You don't have to remember which ones you wanted to squash together or fix up or whatever it is. You can do this workflow to actually kind of ease into that rebasing a little bit more.
So Brent really likes Git LFS. It's pretty cool. Have any of you here actually done anything with LFS before?
Any use cases? Anyone put their presentations up on GitHub with LFS? All my talks are open sourced on GitHub with LFS. So LFS, if anyone doesn't actually know, stands for Large File Storage. So this is an open source project that you can download and use on your laptop, and you can configure to be on GitHub.com for your account or GitHub Enterprise. And what's going to happen here, just like we have in this little graphic, is if you have those binary files that are not really good to version, but you need to have along the source code anyways. So game design, as you have those really large assets that as a developer I don't actually need to use, but needs to be in the source code. I don't want it to take up a large amount of space in my source code, because over time that just makes my repository very large. I want to store it in some kind of external storage, but in my repo I want to point to it. So I can still get references to it. I can do some additional efficiencies that we'll talk about in a minute to make that easy. But LFS allows me to have a pointer to that external storage for that file itself.
Yeah, so anytime you have several large files and you just want to speed things up, that's definitely something that you should look into.
And this is one of those commands that is going to help that workflow a little bit. So git lfs prune, this is going to delete local copies of the LFS files which are old, which will free up disk space on your local Git repository. So this is something you would run on your laptop if your local Git repo was getting pretty large, because you had additional copies of those large assets over time that you just didn't need anymore. It's a really good command to run. And maybe even a little bit better is to pass in the -c option. This will go and check the server to see that those copies exist there. So you can delete it locally and it'll still be on the server for you to actually use. So pretty good efficiency there. There's a whole bunch of configuration options you can set for LFS. You can either pass them in on the command line or you can set these configuration options. And also a point to note here is that I'm not saying git config global. It's a git config for that local repository, because on a per repository basis I may want to exclude different files. So here in this project there's files that are inside the media directory, maybe one that's called really big files that I don't need all the time and I will never need it. So when I do pull operations to get updates for my project, I don't want to have to go download these large assets every time I do that. I just need my source code. I don't need the asset. So setting this will exclude that. And worth mentioning also, there's the inverse of this. So lfs.fetch includes, because you want to make sure you always include a certain file. And I just want to give a shout out to Rick Olson, or Technoweenie, and Taylor Blau, or Taylor R, who work on the Git LFS project at GitHub. They were telling me about LFS clone, which I think is a really interesting command as well. LFS clone is, if anyone has ever dealt with LFS turned on repository and they need to do a clone, and it takes a really long time because it says it's downloading file 1 of 60, file 2 of 60, and these assets are very large. By using LFS clone, you're actually going to be basically speeding up that clone. It does two operations in parallel. It does a regular git clone that only gets the pointer files, so not the large assets, but the pointers to them. And then it does a git LFS checkout, which resolves those pointers in parallel. The TLDR of this is it just works faster. So it's a lot faster to use this. If you know you're working with an LFS repository, just run git LFS clone.
So next we're going to talk about some stuff to do with actual GitHub. So we're going to cover a little bit of collaboration, some discovery and speed, and then gists as well.
So I know we're going to be talking about GitHub stuff, but we're still going to be on the command line just for this one little slide of transition here. How many people knew that GitHub was the largest Subversion host in the world? Hopefully after today, everyone will raise their hand in the next talk that you see this. So people make jokes. They say SVN hub instead of GitHub. But with this, I don't know necessarily why you would maybe do this, but it works just like an SVN repository for you to work with. This is pretty good for people transitioning over to Git and GitHub. If they have some worry about Git and the workflow, and they just want to keep using SVN as a temporary measure to then later transition over to using Git, this is a really good way to convince them to get over into GitHub to actually use that. So again, not a permanent solution, but it does work. And if you have people who are hesitant about GitHub, definitely encourage them to look at this and then later do some migration work. Maybe even coming over to the services desk later and talking to us about migrations will also help you out with that too.
Definitely. So the next thing we want to talk about is both our favorites, I think. So if you go to github.com/explore/subscribe, basically it's going to set you up with an email digest, and you can choose how often you want to receive this email digest, but basically it's going to give you a summary of things that are trending on GitHub, and more importantly, you get information about people you follow, whichever repositories they're starring. So for instance, a good use case for this, if you're getting started in open source and you're trying to figure out, okay, so which open source projects can I start contributing to? I'm a little hesitant, I'm a little scared, I'm just dipping my toes. If you find people to follow and they start starring other repositories, chances are they're going to star a repository that you would be interested in contributing to. And there's other use cases for this as well, but that's definitely something that I've talked to several people about already. So this is an example of what that looks like. You can see you can choose like a daily digest, weekly or monthly. And again, trending repositories on GitHub, and then things from people you follow, whatever they're starring.
All right, so it's a good learning experience for new people as they're working and learning about repositories on GitHub. Discovering some new language, you find out there's talks from people here at GitHub, and you want to go follow those people on GitHub. You find out what other projects they're being interested in and starring as well. And this is kind of an interesting little thing that just came out I think a couple weeks ago or a couple days ago on GitHub as well. Better collaboration with forks. So there's been times, I think actually one of my first pull requests I submitted to a project, they told me that the only way they could accept my pull request was if I rejected or if I removed one of the commits from that whole series, that whole branch that I was working on. I didn't know how to use Rebase at the time, so I had to look it up. It took me a long time. By turning this on for the pull requests that you're sending to maintainers, there's a little setting in the lower right-hand corner of those pull requests that'll essentially say, I'm okay with that maintainer pushing directly to my branch on my fork. So if there's some little intricate workflow that they have going on, and they suggest something to you, you don't know how to do it, turn this on and they can push to your branch, and then they can accept your pull request. So this just eases the collaboration between people on forks, allowing them to basically contribute to your branch as you want to contribute to their project.
Yeah, and there is a blog post on this. If you just search for improving collaboration with forks, you'll find that one. So next we want to talk about something that's pretty rad. So basically you can compare ranges. You can see in the example here we've got 6.4.0.1 ... 6.5.0. And Brent actually has an interesting use case that he showed me.
Yeah, so Paul Betts was working on this repository called Reactive UI, just some open source project. The reason why I always like to show this is because in his release notes, he has this little markdown header that says what's new. And inside that header, he's actually doing the custom ranges on that. So if anyone wants to find out what's changed between different releases, you're able to click that link, and it brings up that URL for you. You'll also see this as you go to pull requests where people have made some additional edits since the last time you looked at the changes, and it'll do a custom range for you. So there's additional places on GitHub kind of with these custom ranges.
You can do about the same thing with a .patch appended to the end of it. So basically, it's the same thing, but in a patch view. You might remember earlier we talked about that -p.
Yeah.
This is a fun one that I like. Anchors on line numbers. How many of us have asked somebody to look at a specific line or a specific range of lines of code? Yeah, so sometimes you have to go and you have to look it up, and it can be a little bit tedious, but you can actually add a # or the hash with the L and the line number, and it will take you directly to the line number. And you can also specify the range, like 12 through 24. And this is cool because it's actually clickable, and it's just easier to look it up. And you can see it demonstrated right here, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, so you're able to click those line numbers when you're on that file itself to actually give people the context to what you actually want them to look at. So if you're going to ask someone to take time out of their day to look at some method, or you want to have a discussion with someone and you want to give them exact context to what it is you're talking about, don't just say the file, don't just say the method name. Actually get these anchor points for them to actually look at. So you can click the first one, shift-click the second one, and then it'll add that to the URL, and easily just send that link over to them. I use this in pull request all the time.
Basically, they'll have no excuse to avoid your request. So this is cool. Not many people know about it, but we use it all the time within GitHub, and it's referencing and closing issues and pull requests actually in your comments. So whenever you do a commit message or like close something and use the word fix, fixes, fixed, close, closes, closed, resolve, resolves, resolved, those kind of iterations, and you also include the issue number or the pull request, it will actually commit that and close the other item that you just cross-referenced. So here's a great example. Carolyn might get upset because this is the I like turtles is something that somebody opened on her computer yesterday.
What's interesting about this too is as you work in these repositories with issues that end up in the thousands of numbers or pull requests within the thousands, it's really hard to remember the exact number of a pull request you were at, or exactly issue you were at. But if you can remember the title, you can start typing the title as you want to autocomplete this as well. So you can either close those issues or pull requests from commit messages. Maybe if you have a rebase workflow and you wanted to reword one of those commit messages to close an issue or another pull request, or when you're actually sending a pull request or merging a pull request like we are here, in that comment box, just like any other comment box on GitHub, this will do the auto-completion or the suggestion of other issues and pull requests for you to work with. So don't worry about remembering numbers. The important piece is have good titles of those threads of conversations, whether they're issues or pull requests, and you can actually close them out very easily from the UI itself.
It's less work, which is always nice. So this is cool. You can filter pull requests by status. Again, we have a blog post on this if you just search for filter pull requests by status.
Yeah, this one's a little dated. It's been out for a while, but I don't actually see it get used a lot. The search box on issues and pull requests has a whole range of additional search options that you can put in there. You see some of this with the UI when you start doing assignee and labels and milestones and mentions and things like that. But this one's interesting because if you wanted to review or do a triage of issues and pull requests on your project, you can sort by ones that are at least passing every CI status. So if you have turned on Travis CI, because it's free on your project and you have a lot of pull requests to work with, you can easily sort and find the ones that are at least passing CI. You know that those are probably the ones that are okay to review, or at least they're in a good state. So we can see a little bit with the UI here, just typing in the upper right-hand corner, sorting those out for us. And this is one of my favorite pieces of GitHub. I feel like some people know about search and they do a little bit of searching, but they don't use any of the advanced search queries. Similar to maybe Gmail searching, you can add in that you're looking for just an issue, you're looking for a query within a title, you want to scope it to only a repository or only within an organization account. There's so many different things to do within code search. Our help documentation on this is pretty phenomenal. I constantly reference it because I don't have it all memorized myself, but it's pretty awesome to see. For instance, just searching on GitHub globally for a repository, GitHub/GitLFS, I'm looking for something that is a pull request, and it has locking in the title. So it kind of reads a little bit like English, or if you're used to Gmail searching, this is where I see most people making the connections here. This makes it really easy to find open source projects, open source repos, issues, whatever it might be, or within your enterprise, especially as you start reaching hundreds or tens of thousands of people. You never know what else anyone's working on, and you need to find those other pull requests to learn from those conversations.
How many of you include code blocks within like a markdown file or something? How many of you use syntax highlighting in those code blocks? Pretty good number. We just like to point this out because it's very great for documentation purposes. You can see here this is going to be highlighted according to how you might see it in your actual text editor. So it looks a lot nicer than just being your black text. This is a good one. Keyboard shortcuts. Any page on github.com, you can do the question mark, and it will bring up the shortcuts that are available for any given page. Some of those that we like are the W. It brings up the branch selector. The L will bring up the labels on existing issues. The S will focus on the search field, and then Brent has a favorite.
Yeah, so how many people use the T key to search for files? Okay, so there's a lot of good uses of a lot of experienced people in the room, so that's pretty good. There is a button for this when you're on the code tab of a repository, but I still just remember the T key every time. I think that's used in some other places as well. Searching for those files is also going to be a fuzzy search, so that means I don't have to remember the full path of where that file is, but I might remember that it's some command with a Go extension on the file name, or it's called clone. It does a fuzzy match on the file, so it makes it really easy to actually find it.
So this is one that I like. You can use just kind of like you can a full repository. You can use commands like clone in the command line, and you can also use things like push, pull, and branch. The branching doesn't quite work the same.
It's still there, but you won't see it in the UI, because gist by default are meant to be very lightweight repositories, but you can still push additional branches to your gist. You just won't see them, so I sometimes use this if I want to work on something for review, and then merge it into master and push it up to the gist for everyone to see.
Yeah. And then another thing for gists is that you can actually embed them by taking the URL and adding a .pibb to the end. And you'll notice here in the bottom right of the image, you can click the view raw, and it will take you to the actual file itself, which is pretty handy.
So if you're using GitHub Pages and you wanted to show good code samples that live on in gist, or you're writing a blog and you wanted to embed gist within your blog in just plain HTML, you can link out to that gist source with the pibb extension at the end to actually render that gist so it looks actually beautiful on your blog.
Yeah, so next we're going to talk about Atom a little bit, just some keyboard commands and then also some packages.
So this is a really interesting one. When you're working in Atom, it took me a little while to see this because it's really subtle on the left-hand side by the file numbers. As we start editing different text or deleting text or adding new lines or whatever it is, Atom is actually Git aware. So it knows that I'm making these edits. And it adds a little bit of a marker next to those file numbers as we go through them. If you want to review what it is and you're not using git add-p or you want to stay in your text editor, you can hit Alt-G, take your hands off the keyboard, and then hit the up key or Alt-G and then hit the down arrow. You can switch between these edited lines within the current file you're working on. So if you're working on a very large, massive file and you want to find out where these changes are, toggle through them really quickly with these keyboard shortcuts, I think is good. Alt-G is kind of everything involving Git, and it might be hard to remember that because I don't remember all the keyboard shortcuts of Atom, but if there's one keyboard shortcut of Atom you must remember today, it's Command-Shift-P. This will bring up the command palette, which is an incredible, awesome tool for allowing you to find all the other packages that you're working with. You installed a Git plugin or a Git package, and you can't remember all the key bindings for it. You installed a markdown rendering tool, a merge conflict tool, a markdown to PDF package, which all of those three will show here in a minute. But you can't remember the keyboard shortcuts for it. Type Command-Shift-P and then type Git or Markdown or PDF or Pane or anything like that, and you will actually find these different commands to kind of increase your own workflow there. And this is one of those, this is the Markdown preview one. So you can actually toggle the way it's rendering the Markdown here. I usually have it set to showing it the exact same way it'll be on GitHub, because this is a markdown file. I'm going to push it to GitHub anyways. So before I push it, I want to make sure it renders correctly. I usually have problems with the headers and some bulleted items after that. It sometimes renders a little differently. So I can preview that right before I end up pushing it up to the server, which is pretty cool.
And that's a good use case for people who are not necessarily developers to kind of get into Markdown and put their documentation up on GitHub. So people that actually work on documentation, or for instance at GitHub, every department is on GitHub and uses GitHub. So even if you don't have that background, it makes it easier for you to learn it.
And this one's kind of a life-changing one for me. So it's a merge conflict resolution package inside Atom. This is awesome because it actually, I'm sorry if it's a little hard to see, but it actually adds the highlighting around where the conflict is. And at the very bottom of the screen, it's also going to mention how many more conflicts there are in that file and that progress bar on the lower right-hand corner. And it'll also list every single conflict within your package that you have to go to next. When you're done with all of these, you can, of course, edit those as you accomplish each one or tackle each one. There's a button to stage it, and then you go back to your editor, or you can actually use the Git Plus plugin from Atom as well to then push that up to the GitHub server. And finally with this one, what's interesting about this is that markdown PDF one that Chris talked about in his keynote. If I can't remember what the keyboard shortcut to do this is, open up Command Palette, search PDF, converts that markdown file to a PDF. And of course, I can go open that up in Finder or your Explorer window and then open up that PDF. What's nice about this is PDFs tend to be a longer form of documentation that people just have along their projects, depending on what their projects are. And those PDFs will also render on GitHub, and you can commit those as well.
Another good use case for people that aren't necessarily developers to have access to creating PDFs and making them available to other people.
Right. One last thing here I thought was really interesting was the time machine package that Chris talked about. So if you're working on a particular file and you want to know the history of that file and you want to compare it to other versions, you can turn on Git Time Machine and actually look back in time and how that file has changed and see the differences, which also do some of that highlighting. I think this is fantastic. I just wanted to call this one out a little bit more than was just talked about in yesterday's keynote. This one is pretty beneficial for everyone to maybe play around with and see as well.
It's also the closest to time travel you can come at the present. You shouldn't really laugh at that.
All right, so we promised a lightning round. I know there was a lot of things that we talked about. There is going to be an office hours over in the services section after this, so any additional questions we can hop over there and help answer as well.
There are also very few services, Ask Services appointments left, so if you have very specific questions, you can see the desk for that, and we would be more than happy to help you with your questions. So he's Brent. I'm Jamie. Thanks for joining our lightning round of Git tips and tricks.
Thank you.